Awesome. No, so our question kind of came up. So I'm in the panhandle of Idaho. So we deal a lot with like Spokane and people coming over to Idaho, committing crime and so forth. But our kind of question that came up recently was if we have a felony crime that is committed in Washington and they come over to Idaho and there's no warrant or for their arrest or any fresh pursuit, are we allowed to arrest based on the felony crime that happened in a different state? And then on top of that, kind of a second question, same thing with the Terry stop. If a crime happens or is about to happen or had occurred in Washington and they came over to Idaho, can we conduct a Terry stop based on that?
Interesting thoughts.
That's a great question.
Good question. I think I'm kind of thinking there's kind of two responses. So I'm going to talk about the first one a little bit first. So crime committed in Spokane, and we all know how those Spokane people are, right? So if the crime's committed there in their state jurisdiction and they are now in your state, you said no pursuit issues, no arrest warrant or anything, that just the PC exists. My initial thought is that we don't have the authority over there unless you've got somebody maybe on a task force that has multi-state jurisdiction to effectuate that, or is kind of my initial thought. What do you think, John? That's kind of where my brain goes on that first part of that.
Yeah, so I agree. I mean, we're talking about I'm a state certified peace officer, at least, right? Or I was. And so my authority is in the state of Arizona. And so there is no warrant in place. I'm not going to be able to enforce the law in another state.
So I was on a DA task force for a while and I had fed creds. So we would go to California or the great state of Arizona. Right, John? And I had the arrest powers when I was deputized, so it carried over there. But then kind of going into your second part of that question, now, do you've got reasonable suspicion of a crime taking place over there and bleeding over into your state? I don't know if that falls in the same line or if RS is RS, or is that kind of contradicting our first answer? That's kind of a good thought process here.
Kind of where the question comes from. So the question comes from the felony is from a custodial kidnapping, right? That's kind of where that question stems from.
I think kidnapping is going to change the game a little bit. There's going to be exigencies, urgencies going on there, right?
Right. Well, and the kids are the victims, right? So we take care of the kids first. But the question remains, do we have the arrest powers, right? So obviously we can take care of the kids and do what we need to do with health and welfare to make sure they're safe.
Right.
Sure. And then the Terry stop comes from if they're driving on the main corridor, I-90, and then there's a hit and run at mile marker 298, and then they come into Idaho and now they're at mile post 1 and WSP asks us to conduct a hit and run investigation, right? Do we have the ability to, seize those people on a traffic stop based on what happened in Washington on a hit and run for an investigation?
Mm-hmm. Looks like Paul, you're saying, Rick, Paul's got some good insight on that. I'm reading Paul's comment here real quick here. Washington confirmed. Justice. So essentially, Paul, you're saying treat him like a fugitive, huh? In that capability, I say. It's a really kind of a good question. Can you add Paul? Oh, Paul, there you go. What you got for us, Paul?
All right, is this working?
Yeah.
So, the PC and all charges need to come from the originating state. But if Washington says they have probable cause and they are filing warrants, you do the NCIC hit confirmation, everything you would with a normal fugitive from justice. And if the person doesn't want to go back to Washington, you house them on the fugitive from justice based on whatever probable cause from Washington. But
that's the custodial aspect in another state, fugitive.
Yeah, the fugitive from justice in Idaho works as basically a civil hold. So it's just confirming that they have extradition to another state, and the person can either waive it and go back to Washington, or they can fight it. they fight it and they'll get held on a governor's warrant. They don't get credit for their time or anything, and then a judge will tell them they have to go back. But
And then
yeah,
Washington.
as long as Washington is going to file charges, you're good to go.
Mhm.
The Idaho side, and then you would simply, you're not booking them on the originating offense. You're booking them
Right.
on.
Okay, that makes sense, because as long as they're in communication with each other, explaining what Washington wants, what's going on both sides, that makes sense. What do you think, John?
Yeah, and I think, I think we're talking about a lot of different fact patterns here, right? First things first, if we're talking about the kidnapping, right? And so if they're actively committing a crime, and so let's say hypothetically, I go and I kidnap my kids from my ex, right? I don't have legal authority to them. I've lost my parental rights, and so I kidnap my kids, or I custodially interfere with them because I'm not trying to hurt them, right? Per my state's legal definition. And so I take those kids and I go to another state. Now, am I actively committing a crime when I'm in that new state? Yes, right? I kidnap my ex in Arizona and I drive into California with her. I'm now violating California law. And so in that situation, I think it's not a matter of, I committed the original, I kidnapped her in Arizona and drove her into California. Well, I'm still kidnapping her in California. And so you're absolutely able to enforce California law in California, even if the crime originated in another state. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate that.